Now it's time to rough out the bow. I've got it laid out. I'm going to remove the excess wood on the sides outside of my lines. And for this I'm going to use a good sharp hatchet. You could do it with a bandsaw. You could do it with a draw knife, though I think if there's knots in the sides, the hatchet deals with that better than the draw knife. Draw knives have trouble blasting through the bigger knots. You just want to be careful, obviously, that you never go past your line. You know, the rougher the tool, the further away from the line you stay. So my plan is to use the hatchet to get down fairly close to the line, but leaving a little bit of a buffer so that I don't cut through it, and then I'm going to clean it up with the draw knife. I don't have a lot of material here to take off, so it shouldn't take me that long, especially with you. It's pretty soft and easy to cut. Alright. So I use a technique with the hatchet for effective and efficient and safe wood removal. I grip the hatchet pretty far back, and I take some good hard swings at a fairly perpendicular angle, and it's going to bite in, and it's going to leave some big notches. So you can see these notches here. And now I'm going to choke up on the axe, and I'm going to come at a steeper angle here, and I'm basically going to shave off those notches. And that way I can control my wood removal. I can also avoid doing a lot of glancing blows, because that's what really wears you out with a hatchet, is when you miss your mark and you're using your strength to stop the momentum of the hatchet. So just take a look and see. The closer you get to the line, obviously, the more you need to chill out and take more careful swings, because one bad swing can ruin your bow at this point. So just always be watching that line. And be mindful. I start from the bottom and I work my way up, just so I don't accidentally grab into some grain and tear down through the bow. Well, I hit my first snag. I wasn't following my own advice, and I was getting a little too cocky with my hatchet work. I was trying to blast off as much of this knot as I could, and the grain grabbed, and I don't know if you can see that line, but it just went past my line right there. Enough that it's going to inconvenience my bow. So I need to adjust my layout a little bit. Luckily I've got enough wood to work with here. I'm just going to shift things over a little bit, and I think I'll be fine, just to avoid that place where it tore out into the side of my bow. Like I said, I should have been listening to my own advice. I should have taken care of that with a rasp. You have to be careful around knots, because they will give you a hard time. Alright, I'm going to fix that up with my layout and then get back to work. You can see, got it roughed out fairly close to the line, as close as I want to get with the hatchet right now. I could probably get closer if I wanted to, but I think after my little mistake there, I'm going to err on the side of caution and just finish that up with a draw knife. I will show you when I've got it all roughed out. Alright, I got the layout fixed. Sorry it's a little harder to see down there, but the bark's going to be coming off soon anyway once we get it down to our lines. So I'm just kind of taking off a little bit here by the handle. I'm pretty conservative about what I take off by the handle right now. It'll be easier to get that contour with a little bit safer tools. It can be a little risky doing it with a hatchet, though it can be done. There's always a balance that comes between using more efficient but cruder tools versus finer but slower tools. There's plenty of times where I feel like I'm ready to switch and I get working with a finer tool, and then I realize that I just have too much wood to take off and I need to switch back to the more aggressive tool. Whenever you can use a more aggressive tool safely without risking your bow, I've found that it's always better to be using a more aggressive tool. Otherwise you can waste a lot of time and energy. But as a beginner, it's probably better to err on the side of switching to a finer tool sooner, because when you're using a rough tool like a hatchet or a draw knife, you can ruin your bow quick, as evidenced by the little mistake that I made there. Luckily, it's not going to be an issue. See, it's going to stop there at the edge of my bow, but it was close. Alright, I think I'm ready to switch over to the draw knife now, so meet you at my bow bench. Alright, now I'm going to switch over to a tool called the draw knife. Has a kind of a single beveled blade here. You always want to use a draw knife so the flat side is facing up, so you have more control over your cuts. Having it like this will dig much deeper, but it's difficult to control how the blade's cutting. Alright, so let me get this secured in here. We're still just working on rough wood removal, getting down to the line. I always want to leave the line there. I don't want to go so that the line's disappearing. I'll be able to fine-tune the width of the bow with other tools later. I want to make sure that I'm not making my bow unintentionally too narrow. Let me grab my farrier's rasp too, because I'm going to need that on some of these knots here. my other aggressive wood removal tool. And the draw knife's going to do great on these cleaner areas, but in these areas here that have knots, the draw knife is not going to do well, so I'll use the rasp to take those areas down. So you're just kind of getting it to bite in and pulling off curls. Now with the draw knife, you always want to be careful. If it feels like it's biting down into the grain and it's starting to tear, I always stop immediately and I take the draw knife out and I take a look at what I need to do, and I usually end up cleaning it up with a rasp. Because if you keep on pulling when that draw knife tears into the grain, you're going to have a bad day. So as you can see, I'm not even going to try to bust through this knot with the draw knife. It's just asking for trouble. So I'm going to work down all the areas around it, and then I'm going to take that spot down with the farrier's rasp. If you're careful, you can have quite a bit of control with the draw knife, as long as you're watching out for the grain to tear out. You get the idea. I'm just going to keep working down the edges just almost to the line, working on any knot areas with the rasp instead of the draw knife. Alright, so in this area I was finding that the draw knife was wanting to tear out, not because of any knots, but just because of the way the grain was laid out in the stave. Sometimes you'll find that on one side the draw knife will be cutting smooth as butter, and then on the other side it's going to be wanting to tear out a lot. You have to listen to the grain and don't fight it. So I stopped with the draw knife. As you can see, I didn't get super close to the line, but even though it's going to take a little bit longer, I'm going to finish up this part here with the farrier's rasp, because I don't want to risk tearing out past my line. So I'm just going to work it down to the line with the rasp, which will be a lot safer. Got this big knot here out at the end. It's going to be at the very tip of the bow, so it's not really going to be an issue. I'm going to put tip overlays on this bow anyway, so I'm going to be cutting down past that anyway and laying a piece of horn over the tip. But I had to use the farrier's rasp to get down past that. You can see how it's wanting to grab the grain here. Yeah. Draw knife is not going to be the ticket on this side. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot to take off. So I've got the bow down to the lines all along the limb. Just going to clean up this handle area and get it down to the lines. I'm going to do that mostly with the rasp so that I don't catch the grain and follow it into the wide part of the limb here. That's a real danger with the draw knife. Got this big old knot here, if you remember, that was right next to the fades, but you know, where it's down below the surface of the back, there's a little bit of sapwood above it. We'll just have to see how that turns out as the bow gets smaller, but I think it's going to be fine. You can see here is where I had that little snafu with the hatchet. It was a close call. The bow might have to work around that a little bit. I left a little bit on this side just to maintain the width. Wasn't ideal, but that sort of thing happens when you're working with natural staves. So we'll just make the best of it, and I think it's going to be just fine. And if anything, if the bow needs to be slightly narrower than I had intended, it'll be okay. I left this bow just a little bit wide for probably what I need in the end. Alright, so I'm just going to start working off this material here by the handle so I can get down to my lines, and then we'll move on to the next step. So if you are going to use the draw knife here, this is what I do. I carefully make little cuts going from the wide part down to the narrow part, and then I can either push it this way to do this side or turn it around. But what I don't want to do is grab right here and pull, because it's going to tear into the wide part of the bow. So a draw knife can work here, it can make things quicker, but you really gotta be slow and careful, or you're gonna ruin your bow. So I can make these kind of curls here, and I'm not gonna rip them all the way through. I'm just gonna cut down on this side, and then you can even push it a little bit from the other side to meet those curls in the middle and take them off safely. You can see I'm down to the line there, and I've got a lot less to rasp here. So if you're careful, it can save you some time, and if you're not careful, it can cost you the bow. So if you don't feel confident in the grain that's near the handle, if you just don't feel confident in your draw knife skills, stick to the rasp. So I've got the bow roughed out in terms of the width. I've got it down to my lines. But as you can see, the thickness is still all over the place. So my next step is going to be to reduce the thickness so that I have a really basic rough taper going from thick here at the fades down to slightly thinner at the tips.